My name is Anita, 57 years young, and the proud mother of my only son, Jeffrey. For 28 years, it was just the two of us against the world after his father passed. We shared a bond I thought nothing could break. Then Jeffrey met Catherine. From the beginning, something about her felt off, but I ignored my instincts. I never imagined that the night before my son's wedding would end with his fiancée telling me I was no longer family. If you've ever had your heart broken by someone you thought would become family, let me know where you're watching from and hit that subscribe button as I share how I learned that sometimes not showing up is the greatest act of love. I became a widow when Jeffrey was just 12 years old. His father, Michael, died suddenly from a heart attack, leaving us both shattered but determined to move forward together. Those early years were difficult balancing grief with the practical challenges of raising a teenage boy on a single income. I worked 2 jobs for a while, as an administrative assistant during the day and waitressing 3 evenings a week. Despite the financial struggles, I made sure Jeffrey never missed out on opportunities. Our relationship grew stronger through adversity. While other mothers complained about their teenage sons becoming distant, Jeffrey and I developed a friendship alongside our parent-child bond. We had movie nights every Friday, complete with homemade popcorn and candy. He'd tell me about school drama and his crush on the girl in his biology class, while I shared work stories that made him laugh. When Jeffrey was accepted to college with a partial scholarship, I cried tears of joy. We'd saved every extra penny for his education, and though it meant I'd be eating ramen noodles for a while, seeing him thrive was worth it. He studied computer science, often calling me late at night to ramble about coding problems I couldn't begin to understand. I listened anyway, proud of his passion. After graduation, Jeffrey landed a job at Tech Forward, one of the leading software companies in our state. Within 3 years, he was promoted to senior developer, earning more in his 20s than I ever had. He insisted on helping me financially, even paying off the remainder of my mortgage as a Christmas gift the year he turned 25. That was the kind of man I'd raised, generous, thoughtful, and kind. When Jeffrey mentioned meeting someone special at a company charity event, I was thrilled. At 26, he'd dated casually, but never seemed serious about anyone. According to Jeffrey, Catherine was brilliant, ambitious, and beautiful, a marketing executive who'd recently joined Tech Forward from a competitor. The first time Jeffrey brought Catherine to dinner at my home, I noticed something that gave me pause. While she was perfectly polite, her smile never quite reached her eyes when she spoke to me. Throughout the evening, she made subtle comments about my quaint decor and asked if I'd considered updating my cooking techniques. Jeffrey didn't seem to notice, gazing at her with complete adoration. "Your home is so authentic," Catherine said, running her finger along my bookshelf. "It must be nice to be content with simplicity." I brushed it off as nervousness or perhaps different social backgrounds. Catherine came from money. Her father owned a chain of luxury car dealerships, and she'd attended private schools her entire life. Perhaps she simply didn't know how her words came across. Over the next few months, Jeffrey brought Catherine around regularly. Each time my unease grew, though I couldn't pinpoint exactly why. She was never outright rude, just subtly dismissive, in ways Jeffrey seemed blind to. When I mentioned my concerns to my sister Janet, she suggested I might be experiencing empty nest syndrome or jealousy over sharing Jeffrey's attention. "Mom, I have something to tell you," Jeffrey said during Sunday dinner 9 months after he'd started dating Catherine. His eyes sparkled with excitement as he reached for Catherine's hand. "We're engaged." I forced enthusiasm into my voice, while my stomach knotted with worry. 9 months seemed so quick, especially for my cautious, thoughtful son. But the look of pure happiness on his face silenced my doubts. If Catherine made him happy, I would make peace with her for his sake. Little did I know that the engagement announcement would mark the beginning of my gradual removal from my son's life. When Jeffrey and Catherine first announced their engagement, I was genuinely excited to be involved in the wedding planning. Despite my reservations about Catherine, I wanted to support my son and hopefully build a closer relationship with my future daughter-in-law. I envisioned shopping for wedding dresses, tasting cakes, and sharing family traditions that Jeffrey might want to incorporate into the ceremony. Reality quickly diverged from these expectations. At the first planning meeting, held at an upscale restaurant I could barely afford, Catherine's mother Sylvia took immediate control. "We've already contacted our event planner," Sylvia announced, sliding a leather portfolio across the table. "The Westbrook Country Club has been reserved for June 12th. We've used it for all our family weddings." I noticed Catherine watching my reaction closely. "The country club is beautiful," I said carefully, "but Jeffrey always talked about getting married by the lake, where he used to fish with his dad." Jeffrey shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "The country club has better facilities, Mum, and Catherine's parents are generously covering most of the expenses." "Of course they are," Catherine added with a tight smile. "We want everything to be perfect, not rustic." The pattern continued throughout the following weeks. Every suggestion I made was politely acknowledged, then swiftly dismissed. When I mentioned the handmade centerpieces I'd created for my own wedding, Catherine exchanged glances with her mother. "That's sweet, Anita, but we're going with professional arrangements. Wedding aesthetics have evolved quite a bit since your day." 3 months into the engagement, Jeffrey's birthday arrived. I'd always hosted a special dinner for him, but this year, Catherine organized a party at an exclusive downtown restaurant. When I arrived, I discovered my seat was at a table far from Jeffrey's, with people I barely knew. "Sorry about the seating arrangement," Catherine said when I mentioned it. "We had to organize by social circles. I'm sure you understand." My son spent most of the evening circulating among Catherine's friends and colleagues, barely having time for more than a quick hug with me. When I gave him his gift, a watch that had belonged to his father, he seemed almost embarrassed by the sentiment. "Thanks, Mom," he said quickly, pocketing it before Catherine noticed. "It's nice." 2 weeks later, I received a group email about the cake tasting, an event I hadn't been told about previously. When I called Jeffrey to ask about it, he seemed distracted. "Oh, that was scheduled last minute," he explained. "Catherine thought it would be too much trouble for you to drive into the city on a weekday." I swallowed my hurt. I would have made the time, Jeffrey. I don't want to miss these moments. "Mom, you're being a bit sensitive. Catherine's just trying to be considerate of your schedule." My attempts to connect with Catherine were similarly unsuccessful. I invited her for lunch, hoping to establish some common ground, but she was perpetually busy with work emergencies. The one time we did meet, she spent most of the hour answering emails on her phone. "I'm sorry," she said without looking up. "The wedding planning on top of my job is just so demanding. I barely have time to breathe." Yet she seemed to have plenty of time for weekend getaways with Jeffrey and social events with her friends. My best friend Linda noticed my growing sadness during our weekly coffee date. "Something's not right with this situation, Anita," she said bluntly. "Catherine's systematically pushing you out." "That's ridiculous," I replied, though uncertainty gnawed at me. "She's just busy, and they have their own vision for the wedding." Linda gave me a knowing look. "Has Jeffrey been calling you as often visiting?" I couldn't deny the truth in her question. Our Sunday calls had become brief and infrequent. Jeffrey's visits had dwindled from weekly to monthly, always with an excuse about work or wedding responsibilities. At the bridal shower, hosted by Catherine's friends, I overheard her responding to a question about family. "My parents are my rock," she said. "As for Jeffrey's family, well, it's just his mother. She's nice. A bit simple, but nice. After the wedding, we'll be starting our own family traditions anyway." The words stung, but worse was the realization that in Catherine's mind, I was already an afterthought, not a meaningful part of their future together. I was becoming just the groom's mother, a role that apparently required little more than showing up on the wedding day and staying in the background. As the wedding date approached, the evidence of my diminishing importance in Jeffrey's life continued to mount. The subtle shifts in Jeffrey's behavior became more pronounced 6 months into the engagement. Where he once called me about everything from work dilemmas to what brand of coffee to buy now weeks would pass with only brief text messages. When I mentioned this during a rare lunch together, he seemed genuinely surprised. "I've just been swamped, Mom. Between work and wedding stuff, there aren't enough hours in the day. Catherine's managing most of it, but there's still a ton for me to do." Yet his social media told a different story. Weekends away with Catherine's friends, wine tasting events, gallery openings. activities he'd never been interested in before, with people I'd never met. Around the same time, I noticed Jeffrey had stopped bringing Catherine to any events where my friends or extended family would be present. When my brother came to town from Arizona, Jeffrey made an excuse about a work deadline, though I later saw photos of him and Catherine at a concert that same night. Then came the discussion about the mother-son dance. Since Jeffrey was little, he'd talked about dancing to What a Wonderful World at his wedding someday, the song his father and I had danced to at our own reception. When I brought it up during one of the rare planning meetings I was included in, Catherine quickly intervened. "Actually, we're keeping the dancing pretty contemporary," she said. "No traditional dances. They drag out the reception and frankly they're a bit outdated." Jeffrey avoided meeting my eyes. "It makes sense, Mom. Keeps things moving." I felt as though I'd been slapped. This wasn't just about a dance. It was about erasing a connection to Jeffrey's father and our shared history. A week later, I discovered Catherine had vetoed my suggestion for the rehearsal dinner without even discussing it. I'd offered to host it at Mario's, a local Italian restaurant, where we'd celebrated every special occasion in Jeffrey's life. Instead, Catherine had booked a trendy fusion place downtown owned by one of her friends. "I thought we agreed on Mario's," I said to Jeffrey when I found out. "Catherine felt it was too casual," he replied, "and her friend gave us a great deal on the new place. You could have told me instead of letting me find out from Mario when I went to make the reservation." Jeffrey's face hardened in a way I'd never seen before. "You're making this a bigger deal than it is, Mom. It's just a restaurant." "It's not just a restaurant, Jeffrey. It's about feeling like my input doesn't matter at all. Maybe that's because you're being difficult about everything," he snapped. "Catherine says you fight her on every decision, and honestly I'm starting to think she's right. Are you jealous that I found someone, that I have a life beyond you now?" I stared at my son in shock, tears welling in my eyes. "Is that what she's told you, that I'm jealous?" He looked away, suddenly uncomfortable. "I just want this wedding to be perfect for Catherine. Her family is contributing so much." "And that means my feelings don't matter." "That's not what I said." He grabbed his keys. "I need to go. Catherine's waiting." After he left, I sat in my kitchen crying, wondering how we'd reached this point. The son who had always considered my feelings now saw me as an obstacle to his happiness. The real shock came when I was reviewing the seating chart that had been emailed to the wedding party. My table was at the far back of the reception hall, nowhere near the family tables, placed with distant acquaintances rather than close friends or relatives. When I called the wedding planner to ask if there had been a mistake, she seemed uncomfortable. "I'm just following the approved chart," she said carefully. "Any changes would need to come from the bride." At the bridal shower, hosted by Catherine's mother, I was seated at the periphery while Catherine's mother took center stage, giving an emotional speech about welcoming Jeffrey into their family, with barely a mention of me or the fact that I'd raised him alone. Throughout the event, Catherine's mother, Sylvia, made subtle comments about how fortunate Jeffrey was to be joining a proper family unit. "We're so happy Jeffrey will finally experience what it's like to be part of a complete family," Sylvia told one of the guests, loudly enough for me to hear. "He's missed out on so much growing up in a partial home." The final revelation came when Jeffrey had a minor car accident 2 weeks before the wedding. I found out 3 days later, not from Jeffrey, but from Linda, whose husband worked at the same company. When I called him in a panic, he seemed annoyed by my concern. "It was nothing, just a fender bender. No need to worry." "Why didn't you tell me?" A long pause. "Catherine thought it might stress you out unnecessarily." Later that day, I called the hospital just to confirm he was truly okay, only to discover I was no longer listed as his emergency contact. Catherine had replaced me, another tie severed without my knowledge. As I hung up the phone, the reality I'd been avoiding hit me full force. I wasn't losing my place in my son's life gradually. I was being systematically removed by Catherine with Jeffrey's tacit approval. The wedding was less than 2 weeks away, and I needed to decide how to respond to this painful reality. The day before the wedding arrived, with a flurry of last-minute preparations. Despite everything that had happened, I wanted to give Jeffrey something meaningful for his special day. I had my late husband's cufflinks, gold with small sapphires that matched Jeffrey's eyes. Michael had worn them on our wedding day, and I'd been saving them for this occasion. I drove to Jeffrey's apartment in the early evening, knowing he'd have the rehearsal dinner later that night. The dinner I'd been uninvited from after Catherine decided it should be just the wedding party. When I arrived, I was surprised to find Catherine alone in the apartment. Jeffrey ran out to pick up his altered suit. She explained, not bothering to invite me in. I stepped inside anyway. I brought something for him to wear tomorrow, I said, holding the small velvet box. His father's cufflinks. Catherine glanced at the box with barely concealed disdain. Oh, well, I actually already got him platinum cufflinks that match my family's jewelry, designer pieces. These have sentimental value, I explained. His father wore them when we married. She took a sip from her wine glass. Anita, I know you mean well, but tomorrow is about starting our new life, not dwelling on the past. I set the box down on the entry table. I think Jeffrey should decide. Something in Catherine's expression shifted, then her polite mask slipping. Let's be honest with each other for once, shall we, woman to woman? The sudden change in her tone made me uneasy. What do you mean? Catherine set down her glass and folded her arms. After tomorrow, you're not part of this family anymore. Not really. I felt as though all the air had been sucked from the room. Excuse me. Look, I've tried to be patient, but your constant presence, your opinions, your little traditions, they're suffocating. Jeffrey and I are starting our own family. We don't need you hovering around us. I'm his mother, I said, my voice barely a whisper. And I'm his wife, after tomorrow. That takes precedence. Her voice was cool, clinical. We'll be moving to Boston in 3 months. My company's headquarters are there, and I've arranged a transfer for Jeffrey. Boston. He never mentioned. My head was spinning. Because I asked him not to tell you until after the wedding. I knew you'd make a scene. She stepped closer. Here's how this is going to work. You'll see us on major holidays, Thanksgiving or Christmas, not both. Phone calls once a month. No dropping by unannounced. No expectations of weekly dinners. I struggled to find my voice. Does Jeffrey know you're saying this to me? Jeffrey understands that for our marriage to thrive, we need boundaries. He might not have the heart to tell you directly, but he agrees. She picked up her phone, checking the time dismissively. If you can't accept these terms, you'll find yourself completely cut off. Your choice. I don't believe Jeffrey would agree to this. Catherine's laugh was cold. Why do you think he's been pulling away? Deep down he resents how clingy you've been. The widow who made her son the center of her world because she couldn't move on. Her words hit like physical blows, striking at my deepest insecurities. I've never been clingy, I said, fighting to keep my composure. I've supported Jeffrey's independence his entire life. That's not how he sees it. But by all means ask him. Force him to choose between his past and his future. See how well that works out for you. Before I could respond, we heard keys in the door. Catherine's transformation was instant, her cold expression replaced by a warm smile as Jeffrey entered. Babe, you're back. Look who stopped by. Jeffrey seemed surprised to see me. Mom, everything okay? I just brought you something for tomorrow. I managed, nodding toward the box. His father's cufflinks. Catherine explained, her voice suddenly gentle. So thoughtful, but we already discussed the platinum set, remember, honey? Jeffrey looked torn. Right, the matching set. But maybe I could... The platinum complements the groomsman's accessories, Catherine reminded him. But it's your call, of course. Her tone made it clear what the right choice was. Thanks, Mom, but I should stick with the plan. Catherine's put so much thought into the details. He placed the box back in my hands. I appreciate the gesture, though. I nodded, unable to speak past the lump in my throat. Catherine watched with thinly veiled triumph. I should go, I said finally. You both have the rehearsal dinner soon. I wish you could join us, Jeffrey said, though his words rang hollow, given that he'd told me days ago I wasn't invited. It's just wedding party, Catherine reminded him. Intimate. I hugged Jeffrey briefly, breathing in the scent of him, wondering when I'd next be allowed this close. I love you, I whispered. Love you too, Mum. he replied automatically, already turning toward Catherine. As I drove home, Catherine's words echoed in my mind. Was this really what my son wanted? Had I misread our entire relationship? The thought of being reduced to a holiday obligation in his life was unbearable. By the time I reached my house, I knew I had a painful decision to make before morning. I didn't sleep that night. How could I, with Catherine's cruel ultimatum replaying in my mind? I paced my living room until dawn, looking at photographs of Jeffrey through the years. His gap-toothed kindergarten smile, awkward teenage years, college graduation with his arm around my shoulders. Had I really been the overbearing mother Catherine described, I thought of all the times I'd encouraged Jeffrey's independence. Sending him to summer camp, despite wanting to keep him close after Michael died, supporting his decision to study abroad, his junior year of college, celebrating when he got his own apartment, instead of pressuring him to live at home to save money. Around 3 a.m., I called my sister Janet, not caring about the late hour. She said what? Janet was incredulous after I explained the confrontation. And Jeffrey has no idea. I don't know what he knows anymore, I admitted. Maybe she's right. Maybe he does resent me and just hasn't had the courage to say it. That's ridiculous, Anita. That boy adores you. This woman is manipulating him, isolating him from everyone who loves him. Classic controlling behavior. Then why is he letting it happen? Love makes people blind, Janet said simply. The question is, what are you going to do about tomorrow? I stared out my window at the stars. If I go to the wedding, I'm accepting her terms. Accepting being pushed to the sidelines of my son's life. But if I don't go, you might lose him entirely, Janet finished. Unless what? Unless this forces him to see what's really happening. By sunrise, I'd made my decision. I took out my finest stationery and began writing to my son, pouring my heart onto the page. I told him about Catherine's ultimatum, about my fears for his future, with someone who would isolate him from those who loved him. I recounted specific incidents of Catherine's manipulation that he might have missed. Most importantly, I told him I loved him too much to stand by and watch him enter a marriage based on control rather than partnership. I folded the letter carefully and placed it in an envelope, along with his father's cufflinks. On the front, I wrote simply, "Read this before you stand at the altar." At 7 a.m., I drove to the hotel where Jeffrey and his groomsmen were staying. In the lobby, I found Sam, Jeffrey's best friend since middle school, and his best man. Sam had always been like a second son to me. "Mrs. Thompson." Sam looked surprised to see me. "Everything okay?" "No, Sam, it's not." I handed him the envelope. "I need you to give this to Jeffrey before the ceremony. It's important he reads it privately." Sam looked concerned. "What's going on?" "Just make sure he gets it," I said, squeezing his hand. "And Sam, be there for him today, whatever happens." I didn't wait for his response. Walking back to my car, I felt simultaneously the heaviest weight of guilt and the strangest sense of relief. I wasn't going to attend the wedding. I couldn't bear to sit in that back row, watching my beloved son bind himself to someone who saw me as an obstacle to be removed. I drove out of town, tears streaming down my face, wondering if I'd just made the biggest mistake of my life. I checked into a small inn 2 hours away, a place Jeffrey and I had stayed once on a fishing trip. The irony wasn't lost on me, seeking comfort in a memory of my son while potentially severing our future relationship. In my room, I turned off my phone, unable to bear the thought of angry messages from Catherine's family, or worse, hurt messages from Jeffrey. I sat by the window, watching the hours pass, imagining the wedding preparations unfolding. Jeffrey putting on his suit, guests arriving at the church. The moment he would open my letter, would he be angry? Relieved? Would he show Catherine the letter, only to have her spin my words into further evidence of my interference? Would he go through with the ceremony anyway, choosing his new life over our history? By the time the wedding would have been starting, I was physically ill with anxiety. I lay on the bed staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment of Jeffrey's relationship with Catherine, wondering if there had been a point where I could have intervened differently, a way I could have helped him see what was happening without risking our relationship. I just want him to be happy, I whispered to the empty room. Truly happy. As the sun began to set, around the time the reception would be in full swing, I finally allowed myself to cry freely. Not delicate tears, but body-racking sobs that left me exhausted. I had potentially lost my son today. Whether my choice had been an act of love or selfishness, I wouldn't know until I turned my phone back on and faced the consequences. I fell into a fitful sleep, still wearing my clothes, the mother of the groom dress I'd never worn, hanging in the closet like a ghost of what should have been. I returned home the following afternoon, emotionally drained, but resolved to face whatever awaited me. As I turned onto my street, my heart nearly stopped. Jeffrey's car was parked in my driveway. He sat on the front porch steps, still wearing dress pants and a wrinkled white shirt, his tie loose around his neck. For a moment I considered driving past, too afraid to face his anger. Instead, I parked and slowly approached, unable to read his expression. "The wedding didn't happen," he said simply as I reached the steps. I sat beside him, leaving careful space between us. Because of my letter, because it was true. He turned to look at me, his eyes red-rimmed, all of it. We sat in silence for several minutes before he continued. "After I read your letter, I confronted Catherine. I just wanted to hear her deny it to explain that you'd misunderstood." He rubbed his face. "Instead, she confirmed everything. Said you'd never been supportive of our relationship, that you'd forced her to take drastic measures. Jeffrey, I know, Mum." He reached for my hand. But that wasn't even the worst part. When I showed Sam the letter, he told me Catherine had been intercepting your messages to me for months. My head snapped up. "What?" "Remember those Sunday brunches you kept inviting me to that I supposedly declined, the birthday card you sent, that I never acknowledged I never got any of them? Catherine had access to my phone, my email. She'd delete your messages before I saw them, then tell me you were pulling back, giving us space." Anger surged through me. "I would never pull back from you. I know that now." He sighed heavily. Sam and Tim started comparing notes too. Apparently I've been declining guys' nights and missing fantasy football meetups I never knew about. Catherine had been systematically cutting everyone out. "What did she say when you confronted her?" Jeffrey laughed bitterly. "First she denied it. Then when I showed her evidence, she switched tactics. Said she was protecting me from people who didn't support our relationship, that she wanted us to build our own life without interference." He stood up, pacing the porch. "When I told her I needed time to think, she gave me an ultimatum. Walk down the aisle or it was over. Said if I didn't marry her today, I'd regret losing the best thing that ever happened to me. And I hardly dared breathe. And I realized the best thing that ever happened to me was having a mother who loved me enough to risk everything to protect me, even when it was painful." He sat back down closer this time. I called off the wedding. Relief washed over me. "Oh, Jeffrey. It wasn't pretty. Catherine's parents threatened to sue for the wedding costs. Her father said some things about you that—" He clenched his jaw. "Let's just say I won't be welcome at the country club anymore. I'm sorry it ended this way." "I'm not." His voice was firm. "I'm sorry I didn't see the truth sooner, that I let Catherine come between us, that I believed her when she said you were trying to control me." Tears filled my eyes. "I was so afraid I'd lose you." "You nearly did." He took my hand. "When Sam gave me your letter, my first reaction was anger. How dare you not show up to my wedding? But then I really read it, really heard what you were saying. About Catherine controlling you, about love, real love." He pulled out the envelope containing his father's cufflinks. "You wrote that real love lifts people up, it doesn't isolate them. That you raised me to be independent because you loved me, not to keep me dependent on you." I nodded, remembering my words. "You were right about Boston too," he added. "Catherine had already signed a lease on an apartment there. Told me it was a surprise that she was handling the details, so I wouldn't be stressed." "What will you do now?" Jeffrey looked out across the yard, his expression contemplative. "First, I need to apologize to a lot of people I've neglected. Then I think I need some time to figure out how I got here, how I missed so many warning signs. I squeezed his hand. We can talk about that when you're ready. What I do know, he continued, is that I want to rebuild what Catherine damaged, starting with us. I'd like that very much. Jeffrey finally smiled, a small, tired smile, but genuine. I was thinking we could get dinner at Mario's tonight, for old time's sake. It was such a simple suggestion, but it meant everything. I'd love that. As we stood to go inside, Jeffrey paused. Mom, thank you for not showing up yesterday. It was the wake-up call I needed. I hugged my son tightly, feeling the pieces of my broken heart begin to heal. Sometimes the hardest choice is the right one. Sometimes love means standing up rather than standing by. 6 months after the wedding, that never was, life had found a new rhythm. Jeffrey had thrown himself into his work, earning another promotion that came with more responsibility, but also more satisfaction. He'd moved to a new apartment across town, saying he needed a fresh start in a place without memories of Catherine. Our relationship had been rebuilt on stronger foundations. We still had our Sunday calls, but now they were honest conversations rather than surface-level updates. Jeffrey had started seeing a therapist to understand why he'd been so susceptible to Catherine's manipulation. My therapist thinks I was trying to create the traditional family I lost when Dad died, he told me over coffee one Sunday. Catherine's family seemed so perfect from the outside. Mother, father, successful daughter. I wanted to belong to that. You already belong to a family, I said gently. Different, but still whole. I know that now. He stirred his coffee thoughtfully. Dr. Landers also helped me see how Catherine targeted my insecurities, made me feel like I needed her approval, her family's approval. The aftermath of the cancelled wedding had been messy. Catherine's parents had indeed threatened legal action over the wedding costs, though their lawyer eventually advised them against it. Catherine herself had vacillated between tearful pleas for reconciliation and vicious accusations, eventually accepting a transfer to her company's London office. Jeffrey had reconnected with friends he'd neglected, rebuilding those relationships one by one. Sam, in particular, had been unwavering in his support, helping Jeffrey move and organizing social events to keep him engaged. My own healing journey had been unexpected. After decades of defining myself primarily as Jeffrey's mother, I found myself reconsidering my own dreams. I'd always loved interior design, but had set aside those ambitions to raise Jeffrey and maintain financial stability. Now, at 57, I'd enrolled in night classes at the community college, pursuing a certificate in interior design. You're never too old to start something new, my instructor had said, when I expressed concerns about my age. Those words became my mantra. 3 months after the non-wedding, I was surprised by a call from Harold, a widower who'd recently moved into my neighborhood. He'd seen me working in my garden and wondered if I could recommend a good landscape service. That conversation led to coffee, which led to dinner, which led to a friendship that was slowly blossoming into something more. When I first mentioned Harold to Jeffrey, I'd been nervous about his reaction. "That's great, Mom," he'd said with genuine enthusiasm. "You deserve happiness too." It was a small comment, but it marked a significant shift in our relationship, an acknowledgement that I was a woman with my own life, not just his mother. Jeffrey himself had recently met someone new at a work conference. Melissa was a software engineer from another company, intelligent, independent, and refreshingly straightforward. The first time he brought her to dinner at my home, I watched carefully for any red flags. "Your mum's amazing," Melissa said to Jeffrey when she thought I couldn't hear. "I see where you get your resilience." When Jeffrey introduced Melissa to his friends, she made a point of engaging with each person, remembering details about their lives, showing genuine interest. She encouraged Jeffrey's relationships rather than competing with them. It was too soon to know if this relationship would last, but the foundation seemed healthier. Most importantly, Jeffrey was approaching it with open eyes, no longer willing to ignore warning signs or sacrifice his other relationships. Last weekend we'd had a family gathering. Jeffrey, Melissa, my sister Janet, and her husband Sam and his girlfriend, and even Harold. Sitting around my dining table, I'd looked at the faces of people who truly cared for each other and felt profound gratitude. This was what family should be: supportive, honest, accepting. Looking back on that terrible night before the wedding, I no longer felt pain when remembering Catherine's cruel words, "After tomorrow, you're not part of this family." She had been right, but not in the way she intended. I wasn't part of that family. A family built on control, isolation, and conditional love. Instead, I was part of something much stronger. The hardest lesson I learned through all of this was that sometimes true love requires difficult choices. Showing up isn't always the answer. Sometimes love means having the courage to step back, to let go, to trust that truth will eventually surface. Sometimes the greatest gift we can give those we love is the space to discover their own truth, even when the process is painful. I also learned that standing up for yourself isn't selfish. It's necessary. For years after Michael died, I'd put Jeffrey's needs above everything else. While that sacrifice came from love, it had unintentionally taught me to devalue my own worth. Catherine had sensed that vulnerability and exploited it correctly, guessing I would tolerate her behavior to keep peace for Jeffrey's sake. By refusing to attend the wedding, I'd finally declared that I mattered too. That respect wasn't optional in family relationships. That love without respect isn't really love at all. Jeffrey and I are closer now than we've been since his childhood, but it's a different kind of closeness, one based on mutual respect between adults rather than dependency. We've both learned that healthy love expands your world rather than shrinking it, brings people together rather than driving them apart. As for the future, I don't know what it holds for either of us. Perhaps Melissa will be the partner Jeffrey deserves. Perhaps my friendship with Harold will continue to deepen. What I do know is that whatever happens, we'll face it with clearer vision and stronger boundaries. Have you ever had to make a difficult choice to protect someone you love, even knowing they might not understand? Share your story in the comments below. And if this resonated with you, please like and subscribe to hear more stories of healing and growth. Remember that sometimes the greatest act of love is having the courage to stand up rather than stand by. Thank you for listening to my story, and may you find the strength to honor both yourself and those you love in all your relationships.